Welcome to Coming Clean, the podcast dedicated to common sense environmental dialogue, environmental optimism, and real environmental solutions. This show is proudly powered by Ørsted. Welcome back to Coming Clean with your host, Benji Backer. I am really excited today to have two different guests providing two different perspectives on the future of electric vehicles. First, we're going to have Kristen Siemen, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer for General Motors, which is making an all-electric push towards 2030 and 2035 goals. After that, I will have a conversation with Brent Bennett, who is leading the energy program at Texas Public Policy Foundation, a right-of-center think tank in Texas that is working on talking about maybe some of the downsides of moving to electric vehicles too quickly. We'll hear both of their perspectives today on Coming Clean, and they both have incredibly important points that I'm really excited to share with you. Let's get into it. I am super excited to have here today Kristen Siemen, who's the Vice President and CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer of General Motors. And I'm sure our listeners are really excited about this episode because it's the first one to really hone in on the EV and transportation side of things. But Kristen, welcome to the show. And it's just so great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, Kristen, you and I met at the Aspen Institute conference in 2022, and we just saw each other a few weeks ago at the 2023 conference, and we shared a lot of similar stories and love for the Midwest and growing up there, and also having the heart of General Motors EV push be in the Midwest, where you're kind of revitalizing a lot of the area that was struggling for a while. But GM has a really forward-looking sustainability mindset. And it's something that I think a lot of people, even though it's at the forefront of your messaging now, still probably haven't heard about. So I'd love for you to talk about, just to get us started, how GM is thinking about sustainability, why it is such a focus, and what the plans are for the next couple of years and decades, honestly.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah, it was so great to meet you and see you again this year. And as you said, the love for the Midwest. I actually grew up in Warren, right around the corner from General Motors Technical Center. So as maybe as sappy as it sounds, I always dreamed of working there. So I'm living out my dream. But it really is an exciting time at GM. We actually set a vision of 000 back in 2017. And that was zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion. And we've been well on our journey ever since then. And then in 2021, we set some pretty big, bold goals. The first was to be carbon neutral in our products and operations by 2040. And the second was to eliminate tailpipe emissions from new U.S. light-duty vehicles by 2035. We've set science-based targets that are associated with those, and really just working towards, that all-electric future that we see as really being able to make such a huge impact, not just on our industry, but overall. Transportation is one of the biggest sectors when you look at what we need to do from a climate change perspective. And our footprint alone, 84% of our footprint is our carbon footprint is the emissions that comes from the customer usage of our vehicles. So by transitioning to an all-electric fleet, we'll really be able to tackle the biggest piece of that. It doesn't mean we can ignore everything else. In fact, we've made some big announcements. Our scope 1 and 2 is less than 2% of our total footprint, but our scale is big. Our footprint, is significant. And so we announced this year that we actually met our renewable energy goal, which was to be 100%. Originally, our 100% renewable energy goal was set to be accomplished by 2050. We accelerated that a couple of times, but we announced this year that we actually have sourced all of the commitments that we need to be able to be 100% renewable in the U.S. by 2025. So 25 years ahead of schedule on that one. We've said we cannot make this transition by ourselves. It's going to take policy. It's going to take collaboration between, private and public and across industries, et cetera, and certainly with the utility markets as well. And so In fact, I think there was an announcement that came out just recently that this year was the first year that the U.S. actually had more, progress in renewable energy usage over, new energy coming from coal. So that transition is happening faster than I think we anticipated, as I said, with GM's commitment and many other companies that are committing, their own transitions to renewable energy. It's something that needs to happen. It's going to help many sectors well beyond just the, transportation sector. And when we look at renewable energy, we look at it in 4 pillars. The first is energy efficiency and everything we can do to reduce our own needs. Second is around additionality of renewables, which we talked about. Then it gets into policy and then resiliency, and so if you think about what the car park, the electric vehicle car park will be able to do and help with the grid as we get into technologies of, vehicle to grid, et cetera, I think that transition is so important. And by going to an all electric future, by making our own commitments around renewable energy, we're helping to accelerate that.
Yeah, that's 100% correct. I mean, we're definitely going to have to build out a lot of, continued solar and wind and hydropower and nuclear if we're going to truly decarbonize. I'm wondering, how you see the split. Do you see it possible with wind and solar only? Do you see it as something where you're going to need nuclear? Are you guys investing in battery storage? One of the other really big challenges other than the grid is obviously the battery side of things. And that's kind of the elephant in the room for a lot of people who are skeptical of the transition to EVs. I'd love for you to talk just generally, and we can dive a little bit deeper into the battery side of things. But how are you guys viewing the future of batteries within the EVs, especially at the scale that you're trying to, make EVs 100% of our fleet eventually, and especially the GM fleet? How are you viewing the battery side of things more generally?
Yeah, I mean, we're really proud of what we've done. And I mean, it seems both internally and externally that we're making announcements, almost on a frequent basis of different partners that we have as far as raw materials and, assembly plants. We've got 4 battery cell facilities in the U.S. that we've talked about. The first in Spring Hill is in production now. The Lordstown facility is underway. I'm sorry. Lordstown is in production. Spring Hill is next. Following up in the facility in Lansing, and a 4th one to be announced with our partners at LG Energy Solutions. We've got a battery innovation center that we are putting up in our Warren Tech Center as well to really continue the evolution of battery chemistry and new technologies, both from reduction in battery pack cost all the way to looking at different materials that we're using.
Do you think that we have enough resources in the United States to make the batteries for the long term, or where do you think, from the resource perspective, we're going to have to continue to expand in this space?
I do. I mean, I'm not an expert on every material and where it's available, but I think if you just look at what's happened in the short term, we've got a partnership with a company called Controlled Thermal Resources out in California, in the Salton Sea area, and they're, working on extracting lithium there with a, much lower carbon process, and they're projecting that they could actually source 70% of the world's lithium out of that site. So, you can see prices at what's happened recently in the market. I think it's the standard supply and demand. I also believe in, innovation and entrepreneurship when there's a need or a demand. New technologies come up, new players come up. You can see it in every sector, right? And I think that's what the U.S. is known for.
Are there any really cool up and coming technologies within the mining and or battery space that people should be aware of that are just really cool that you guys have invested in?
I mean, I think the a lot of things that have happened at the battery raw material standpoint, but probably, what I would be most excited about is how we're looking at using our Altium technology, across the entire energy sector. So, GM Energy was announced last year, which will consist of solutions for home, commercial, really looking at how we provide customers with a seamless integrated energy management system, which will help them from a customer usage standpoint, but also, as we talked about grid resiliency, and really be able to use that backup power and storage for usage. Right today, an EV battery, first off, the battery lasts longer than we ever anticipated. And so even after the full usage, from an automotive standpoint, there's secondary usage for storage and backup power, et cetera. But then from a customer standpoint, to be able to use that energy either both from when they charge, be able to manage that from a cost and time of usage standpoint, to in the event of a power outage, to be able to use that backup energy for, powering up their homes, et cetera. So GM Energy is really going to be, I think, a game changer as far as how we're able to provide services to the customer in a very seamless way.
And what does the infrastructure for this look like? Is it how do you see the transition between a fossil fuel infrastructure and an EV infrastructure happening at the scale that's needed? What sorts of solutions do you feel like are needed? And where do you see the biggest hurdles in this? And where do you see the role of American innovation playing in that? And why is that so important to GM?
Yeah, great question. I think EV accessibility and affordability, as you mentioned, is number one. Which is why we're so focused on having a portfolio of vehicles that really crosses every, price point and segment. Everything from the very affordable, Bolt today to the Equinox and Blazer that'll be coming out soon. The Chevy Equinox EV starting at around $30,000. Really enables, the broadest segment, very family-focused vehicle for people to get into. And I think that's important for customers to see that this isn't just a luxury vehicle, although we have those as well, right? The Cadillac Lyriq is pretty exciting, but again, rather affordable.
The Hummer EV.
Yes. Well, yeah, it's hard to pass up on those that are super fun, but it shows the capability of an EV, right? It really can be. You can do everything you did in a traditional ICE vehicle in an EV, off-road capability, et cetera. And so I think that's super important for, there's many people that their vehicle they need for their livelihood, right? For whatever, whether that's construction or sales, et cetera. And so it's important that they meet the needs of the customers. We talked about reliability of the grid. Again, GM's doing everything we can to support that, from charging stations to ease of use for customers. But it's going to be important that, the resiliency and the reliability is there. And then, charging infrastructure as a whole has to continue to be built out. There's no way General Motors can do that by themselves either. Again, going to do everything we can to support it. But, and we've got things in place to help customers through the education, everything from there's a team out there that's available 24/7 called through our EV Live. So if customers are questioning how they go about getting a charger in their home or what do they need to do to be able to make this transition, so people are there to help. So education is part of it, and then policy is really important too. There's been a lot that's happened. We're really excited with some of the great things that came out of the IRA and how that will help accelerate this transition. And so we talk a lot about everybody in, that this is a transition we can't make by ourselves, but we're going to do everything we can to accelerate it.
Yeah, and that acceleration, I think, going back to your earlier point, will take a lot of continued innovation outside the company, inside the company. But you guys have a lot of really incredibly smart and capable and talented people that are young, that are kind of pushing for this change from within. What role do those young people have inside the company and outside? And what role do you see young people playing in this transition?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Innovation is at our core. GM, frankly, changed the industry over 100 years ago, and I feel we're about to do it again. If you just look at the technologies and the innovation that's coming out every day you said it, it's an incredible team of engineers and frankly designers, and it takes the whole company, whether it be our purchasing and supply chain folks that are making these innovative deals. But that innovation is at our core. In fact, as we, as a company, we recently, last year, issued or restated kind of our purpose. We had this vision around 000, and there was a team across the company. As we are in the middle of this, transformation, it includes our acceleration, not just to EVs, but also to AVs, and autonomous things that are happening. But our purpose statement is we pioneer the innovations that move and connect people to what matters, and it's very simple, but it certainly connects us to our history, our heritage of innovation, captures who we are today and really who we are at our best as far as looking ahead. And so it goes beyond just, the individual vehicle usage, goes into delivery vans, ride shares, the things that are happening at BrightDrop and Cruise. We're creating new businesses with new segments that we haven't necessarily played in before. I talked about GM Energy. And so it's really exciting to see how we're partnering both internally and externally. I mentioned wind catching systems as we look at innovation, even in the renewable energy space. And so as an engineer myself, it's really exciting to see these things that we're doing and how every day engineers and the team are looking for ways to make it a more effective, more competitive, lower cost, and really new features and things to make the customer as excited as we are.
Yeah, and those who are understanding of that are incredibly excited. I remember going around the country in that EV years ago, which obviously the conversation has developed even more so than it was then, but just the excitement from a lot of these smaller town communities and seeing an EV for the first time and wanting that to be part of their transportation future in those towns was really incredible. And it was remarkable how even in some of these smaller towns, the EV infrastructure is being built out, and it was something that happened before these big capital investments and big, government investments from the state and federal level. So there's a lot happening. It's happening really quickly. It's probably hard for you to keep tabs on it all because there's pretty much something happening every minute of every hour of every day. And I'm sure some new innovation has happened since we've even started recording this podcast, but we're, kind of closing in on time. And I'd love for you to talk through just a rapid fire. What is your favorite GM EV and non-GM EV? I think people would love to hear kind of your perspective on that.
Oh, favorite EV is I'm torn, I'll be honest, between the Chevy Equinox EV and then the Cadillac Lyriq. I mean, the Lyriq is, I think the Equinox is going to open the doors to much broader segment and really bring people into an EV that weren't considering it. And so that excites me to see the transition accelerate. The Cadillac Lyriq is by far one of, probably the best luxury vehicle I've ever been in. Not the best luxury EV, but it is beautiful. And so there's that's my favorites there. As far as non-EV, I don't know.
Non-GM. What's your favorite non-GM EV?
Oh gosh, non-GM.
I know you're not allowed to say that, but
oh gosh, I don't have a good answer there. My favorite non-EV was going to be the Z06, the Corvette. I mean, there's nothing quite like that acceleration, and So I joke. I say that I look at sustainability a little bit like I look at my diet. I like to eat junk food, and so I run.
Yep.
In the same sense, I still want us to be able to drive those Z06s every so often, and so we're going to make EVs to balance those out until the E-rate comes out and those type of things, and so and everything else in this space, right? It goes beyond just our sector, airline flights, et cetera. But we've got to do our part, and we've got to make this transition as quickly as we can. And I think our products are super exciting, and I'm excited for the pickup trucks to come out this year. And there's so much in the portfolio. When you really look at what's happening, it's hard not to smile.
Well, in the midst of moving incredibly fast and smiling through it all, I appreciate you taking the time to join the podcast and talk a lot of this through and answer some of those questions that people have been asking me and questions that I've had myself. And yeah, very excited to see where GM takes this and where the future of EVs and autonomous vehicles and all the work that you're doing goes. So thank you for that, and thank you for embracing our message as well. And excited to continue this conversation and work together towards a more sustainable future.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thanks for all you're doing.
I had a wonderful conversation with Kristen Siemen of General Motors, who talked a lot about their electric vehicle transition and their plans there, asked some tough questions and got some answers there that were really helpful. But I also think, for the sake of our listeners, something that we don't hear enough of is this kind of counterpoint side of these panacea or kind of a single one-size-fits-all solutions that we're told work for fighting climate change and reducing emissions and protecting the environment. And somebody that I've really enjoyed talking to provide a potential counterpoint to the electric vehicle transition, at least at the scale and the size that it's happening right now, is my good friend Brent Bennett from the Texas Public Policy Foundation, somebody that I've talked to at length about this, and somebody who, despite working for a public policy organization that focuses on this, not only focuses on this in his day-to-day job, but has really studied this throughout his life. And has been really active on the battery side of things and on the electric vehicle transition, even before his time at TPPF. So welcome to the show, Brent. And I would love for you to quickly introduce yourself and maybe give a little bit of your background when it comes to electric vehicles before we kind of dive into what was said in the last interview and kind of your stance on everything.
Sure. Thanks, Benji. Yeah. So I'm Brent Bennett with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I'm part of the Life Powered Project, which is our national energy initiative at TPPF. So I've known Benji for a long time, and we kind of working in the same area. So my background, I got a PhD in material science at UT Austin, and I was my focus was utility scale energy storage. So I did battery research, but not for EVs, but for large scale energy storage. But after my first job out of school, after I graduated, was with a company selling carbon nanotubes, primarily for auto manufacturers to improve their batteries, to basically hybridize their batteries, taking lead acid or lithium ion batteries and improving their ability to work in hybrid vehicle applications. So that was where I kind of got my introduction to this particular side of the battery world. Got to visit battery manufacturing plants around the world and got some great exposure to this. So, even though I've been about 6 years away from that now, I've been at TPPF for almost 5 years. I still kind of maintain a connection to that. I try to do some consulting to keep myself fresh in that field.
Yeah, you've definitely had a lot of experience in seeing this transition before it even was publicly talked about as much as it is today. We all know that General Motors and Ford and these companies have pledged to go 100% EV by a certain date. Toyota has started to walk that back. Other car manufacturers kind of fall somewhere in between. I guess, generally, what is your stance on the future of EVs, and what do you feel like GM and Kristen Siemen and the work that they're doing, where do you see the pros and the cons generally? And then we'll dive into some of the specifics.
I think the advantage of EVs is that the electric motors, especially for city driving, are very efficient and generally work very, very good. Like, they're more simple, right? So if you can get the battery right, the motor side of things is very helpful, right? And that's why I think that that efficiency, and just the fact that, as Kristen noted, I mean, I got to drive a Tesla for the first time about a month ago. We rented one for my 3-year-old son, who just loves. Our neighbors have Teslas and he loves them, so we got one for him just to have some fun with, and it's a lot of fun to drive. That's absolutely true. I think there's the stigma that people have about, EVs not being as good in terms of performance as gas vehicles. I think that's something we can get over. And that's why I'm bullish in the long run on EVs, because I think that there's some advantages to it. The problem is that we're, especially with government policy, trying to force a transition to 100% EVs. From my experience in this field, there's a lot of advantages to hybrids, because hybrids, you can use a very small battery. You have is a much smaller battery, but you still get really good fuel efficiency because of the efficiency of the electric motor at low RPM, and you take advantage of that. But you also take advantage of the high range of the gas vehicle and all the existing infrastructure that we have for gas. So you lower emissions a lot, you improve your efficiency a lot, but you still get to use the existing gas infrastructure. So I think without the push, especially now with the Biden administration coming out with new CAFE standards, new fuel efficiency standards, combined with new CO2 standards that are going to basically force 50% of vehicles to be 50%. I think by 2030, something about 50% of all new vehicles are going to have to be electric vehicles in order to meet those standards, fully electric. So I think that's very problematic, because we're trying to basically push this transition through policy faster than it would normally happen through the market.
And that's the problem that I see too, is that basically by saying we're going to be doing 100% of anything, we're siphoning off any other solutions, right? We're saying that nothing else is worthy of being pursued. And as we've seen with hybrids, with really any fuel efficient vehicle that has been coming online, every car has been getting more and more efficient, year after year already with the old technology. So that's not even including that. It's also not including the potential hydrogen powered vehicles or other technology that we haven't even invented yet. And I do fear too, without even getting into the battery size and how much it takes to just create, how many resources it takes to just simply create 100% electric vehicles for our fleet of vehicles in this country and worldwide. If you don't even get into that, you still are basically putting all of your eggs into one basket. And 100% oil and gas wouldn't be good. 100% wind wouldn't be good. 100% solar wouldn't be good. You and I have talked about that too. And the same thing is true on vehicles. And I love EVs. I definitely think that they're important for the long run. I drove one across the country and, showed for 60 days going through 36 states that it's possible to drive an electric vehicle with even the 2016 Tesla. And that's only gotten better. But to say that we're only going to have those by 2030 is a scary proposition, especially when you look at a state like California that has set those standards for themselves before the federal government even has started to become so active on it. They've accepted over $12 billion of taxpayer subsidies for electric vehicles. but only 1% of the registered cars in California are electric vehicles. And they plan on banning the sale of gas vehicles by 2030. So they've accepted $12 billion of the subsidies that you're saying don't have, a physics bias. You can't skew incentives to fit a physics problem. And it hasn't quite worked at the level that they're talking about doing it at 1% instead of 100%. But yet they're trying to do that in the next 7 years. And how do you see this playing out when we're both agreeing that electric vehicles are an important part of our future? We both agree that I'm sure that doing it in the United States and doing the batteries and all that stuff, which we can get into, doing all that in the United States is better. It's not that we shouldn't be pursuing it, but what do you think is going to happen if we rush this too quickly?
That is the issue is timing, and also, allowing the market to evolve, right? And I think for a company like GM, they can, it might actually make sense for them to shift their business model to 100% EV. I think that a lot of it comes from just the stigma that fossil fuels are bad, and that we can never have clean air as long as we have fossil fuels. And we've reduced our emissions of real pollutants. CO2 is not a pollutant in and of itself, right? It causes warming, which then causes damage, right? But it doesn't, we breathe out CO2 with every breath that we take, right? It's not a pollutant in and of itself. And the EPA puts out a great report every year that shows that in detail. And the COVID lockdown showed that, you can take half the cars off the road and has almost no impact on pollution levels, because most of pollution levels now are dictated by natural forces, natural chemistry, and weather. So it's really a kind of this idea that we have to get rid of fossil fuels entirely in order to have a clean environment is not true, because we can do a lot of what we need to do while still having some fossil fuels in the mix, right? And so I think it's the same philosophy behind net zero by 2050. It's like there's no magic to saying that, well, if we don't achieve net zero by 2050, then if we're a little off, 5 years or so, that suddenly the world's going to collapse.
And I think that what's missing from this equation is that there's such an interconnectedness between these issues and everything else that we do day to day. Like an electric vehicle, a decision to go 100% electric vehicle doesn't just have to do with transportation. It also has to do with the energy grid and what's powering those electric vehicles when you're charging them. It has to do with the batteries and where are you getting the batteries for those electric vehicles.
Yeah. Well, the perfect balance ideally is what the market would determine, right? If we want to reduce emissions, then we set standards for emissions and let the market figure out how to meet that, right? Rather than setting effectively mandates for certain technologies, right? I mean, Texas, the problems. I mean, I'm right now involved in a very heavy debate about market reform in the Texas electric market, and that's most of what I spend my time on. And the whole problem is being created by the fact that we have federal incentives specifically for wind and solar, and that are driving those technologies and not allowing us really to have a choice of what types of technologies to use, what our view of the right balance of emissions reduction should be. So that's, I do have a lot of concern the same thing is going to happen in EVs, again, because of the ideology that we have to get rid of fossil fuels as soon as possible, rather than looking at, well, how do we effectively reduce emissions while still, maintaining the energy and the lifestyle that we all demand, right?
Well, and I think that's a really good point, that this is largely a market problem. Most of these things come down to being a market problem, because at the end of the day, I mean, I was talking to students at the Citadel, the cadets at the Citadel this week in South Carolina about this issue. And they asked, well, how are we going to get China and these other countries that are largely leading the production of mining and, of course, other energy sources and all sorts of things related to this topic, how are we going to get them on board when they don't seem to care at all? And I said, the only way they will care is if it is cheaper to come up with the cleaner solution than it was before, or then the alternative, because if it's not cheaper, they're always going to pursue the dirtiest. They're always going to pursue the cheapest option, regardless of how clean or dirty it is. They don't care about the environment in the same way that the United States does. They care about the economics of it. So if we can't make this economical, and you can't make it something that works in the marketplace on its own, and obviously that's hopefully the goal of a lot of this investment, but if you can't have that work on its own, then we're putting ourselves at risk while others don't do the same. And I see that as a very, very scary slope to go down. Again, being completely supportive of trying to pursue solutions like that.
The challenge with China, I think, is that, they need to go through the same kind of transition. I call it a transition that we did, which back 50, 60 years ago, which is, they accumulated enough wealth to where they could affordably clean up their air, and their citizens demanded that happen, right? So I think that's what has to happen, is they need to get to a point. And this is true of India too. The problem is that, the trade-off for them is that either they have the pollution or they don't have energy at all. And in that choice, you're going to take energy, wherever you can get it from, you're going to take it. I think that the key thing they have to be careful with is that, batteries are not like semiconductors and other types of technologies. I mean, the rate of improvement for batteries technology is about 5% a year, and it has been for decades, in terms of energy density, in terms of charging ability, and so on, right? So you have to look real close. You have to think of that and say, okay, where are batteries now? Where do they need to get to be in terms of cost and energy density and so on to achieve our goals, right? And can that be achieved, right? Even if we don't get to 50% of new vehicles being EVs by 2030, if the government has to walk that back because it's physically impossible, there's still going to be enough of a market for us to capture.
Well, and that's the real question mark here. And I think GM's bet is that they'll be able to figure that out. And obviously there's a lot of challenges and hurdles to figure out. And, we can hope that they do that. And like you said, obviously it's a very saturated market at this point. You wonder who's going to win and lose that battle, because someone's going to lose, you would think, and it'll be interesting to see who does. And I really appreciate you providing this perspective, because I think it's really important for people to hear. I think I share a lot of the sentiments that you have, and I think I share a lot of the sentiments that Kristen has. And I think we've got this real opportunity here to have these complicated conversations about the future of this topic, because that's what it's going to take. It's not as simple as going to a stump speech and saying, we can be 100% EV by this date. It's also not as simple as saying EVs suck and there's no future for them in this country. And those are the kind of two mindsets that we hear about. That's not what we heard from you. It's not what we heard from Kristen. And it's really exciting to hear that, there's these different perspectives that we can actually have in conversation. So I appreciate you taking the time. I also appreciate Kristen taking the time, because both of your leadership on this is critical, because if we're going to get to a common sense solution in the future on transportation, it will not come from the oversimplification that we have seen. So appreciate you joining us and appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Benji. It's a pleasure.
And before we jump, the Coming Clean podcast is grateful to be powered by Ørsted, a wonderful company strengthening America's energy security with reliable and domestic clean energy. Through its integrated renewable energy solutions, Ørsted is creating American jobs, investing in American communities, and driving American innovation, all while preserving our country's natural habitats. A clean energy future truly connects us all, and Ørsted is helping lead the charge. To learn more, visit us.orsted.com.